Theatrephonic presents Sweets from Strangers, a short story. Written by Barbara Jennings. Performed by Emmeline Braefield.
When I decided to kill my parents, it was not out of malice. They were kind, affectionate people, and I loved them. But they were a hindrance, and I needed to be free. Orphans were far more likely to have adventures than those with sedate, routine family lives. Outwitting pirates, unmasking spies, and foiling criminals didn't fit easily with piano practice and Sunday school. That was clear from the stories I brought home from the children's section of the public library. I found more evidence on my mother's bookshelves. Jane Eyre, Mary Yellen, the nameless second Mrs. De Winter. They were all orphans. So, to become embroiled in mystery and adventure, whether or not it involved a Mr. Rochester or a Max de Winter, I must be, or appear to be, alone in the world. Even though my parents' deaths were hypothetical, I didn't want them to be subjected to suffering or any act of violence. Murder and lingering disease were out of the question. I decided that, should an explanation be necessary, I would murmur something about a gas explosion. Then there was my name, which I found to be too mundane. I had given a lot of thought to this, and my newly orphaned self would be called Marianne Fairfax. Even now, well over 60 years later, I still find that a suitable name for a heroine. "Would you like to help me spring clean the shed, Mouse?" my father asked as we ate breakfast. Apparently I had been an unusually quiet baby, hence the nickname. "She's going to her friend Janet's for the day," my mother reminded him. But I wasn't going to Janet's. I was setting out on my great adventure. There it was, the first lie, the first rift in our perfect unity. "May I take a packed lunch?" I said. "Then we can have a picnic in the woods." "Of course," my mother said. "I'll make you some sandwiches. And wear a cardigan. It'll be cooler in the woods." She turned to my father. "Are you just tidying the shed or actually getting rid of stuff?" she asked, smiling at him. My father's reluctance to part with anything was a family joke. "Bit of both," my father said, spreading marmalade neatly over his toast. "No point throwing away something that might come in handy." And he winked at me. I felt a pang about consigning them, even theoretically, to their graves. I would come back and revive them later, of course, after the great adventure. But I would be a different person then. Things would never be the same again. Margaret from school and her mother were already on the bus. There was an empty seat just behind them, but I didn't want to get into conversation, so I said, "Hello," politely, and continued to the back and sat by a window. On my lap I held my small duffel bag, the equivalent of the brightly coloured backpacks children wear now. This was a sober brown, closed by a drawcord which fastened to the leather-reinforced base of the bag to form a shoulder strap. It contained my supplies for the adventure. I'd taken a new toothbrush from the cupboard in case the absence of mine in the bathroom was noticed during the day. I'd packed changes of underclothes and socks, my hairbrush, a spare handkerchief, a notebook and pencil, and, cushioned in the socks, my new sunglasses, of which I was very proud. The contents of my china piggy bank had been transferred to the large tartan purse that Auntie Peggy and Uncle George had brought me back from their holiday in Scotland. Sunlight shattered and reformed through the trees lining the country lanes as the bus trundled along, only speeding up when we reached the main road. Most passengers got off in the town, intent on their Saturday morning shopping. Margaret looked back at me curiously as she and her mother alighted, but I pretended not to notice. When the bus set off again, I moved to a seat on the other side of the aisle, ready for the first eye-tingling glimpse of the sunlit sea an hour later.
"Think positive thoughts,"
Uncle George often said.
"If you expect things to go right, they probably will."
Keeping this in mind, I spent the morning being open to any possibility of adventure. First, I walked along the shore as far as the beach huts, a mix of cheerful colours like a box of wax crayons. Some were available for holidaymakers to hire during their stay, giving them extra privacy on the beach and shelter from bad weather. I thought they would be good places to conceal smuggled goods or hide from the law, but today they seemed entirely respectable. The only sign of life was a middle-aged man snoozing in a deck chair in front of a green hut, his newspaper slipping gradually between his knees. When the sandy beach gave way to shingle, I paused and watched the boats in the distance. I imagined being invited to join the crew of the Lady Matilda or the Kittiwake. But there was no immediate opportunity of that, so I climbed the steps set into the concrete wall and made my way back along the seafront, which was devoted to the needs of visitors. Small hotels set back from the road, fish and chip restaurants, tea shops and sweet shops, and tiny premises outside which nets of beach balls, buckets of plastic windmills, and unsteady rotating racks of postcards narrowed the pavement. There were amusement arcades too, dark caverns in which multicoloured eyes flashed and flickered. On the opposite side of the road, next to the seawall, were kiosks and portable booths where you could buy shellfish and ice cream or hire deck chairs and windbreaks for the beach. Should my adventure not present itself immediately, my plan was to find a job for a day or two, so I looked out for "Help Wanted" signs. I would have to pretend to be older than I was, of course, but being tall for my age would help. It occurred to me that I would appear older if I put my hair up, but I didn't know how to do it. The best place to work would undoubtedly be a hotel, because one would sleep there as well. I had never stayed in a hotel, but I felt they would be likely to harbour glamorous spies and international criminals. I had now covered all the ground already familiar to me from visits with my parents. Going further inland, I found ordinary shops, a couple of banks and a post office, and neat residential streets. Many of the houses offering holiday accommodation. Their names were displayed on boards in the front gardens. Marine View, The Haven, and so on. I assumed guest houses were run by the homeowners and probably wouldn't need live-in staff. By 12:30, I was hungry. I ate my sandwiches sitting under a tree in a little square. I was not yet caught up in mystery and adventure, but I wasn't disheartened. Perhaps I should go into one of the seafront hotels and ask if they had any job vacancies. But first I would go to the pier. I pushed through the clanking turnstile with its familiar peeling red paint. The stalls near the entrance were doing a brisk trade in cheap sun hats and sunglasses, postcards, fishing bait, and sugar in a variety of forms, toffee apples, pink candy floss, and even pinker sticks of rock. I continued along the pier, passing fewer and fewer people as I got further from the entrance. There were benches at intervals and coin-in-the-slot telescopes with plinths for children to stand on so they could reach the eyepieces. I had always loved the pier. You could lean on the rail, watching the wheeling, soaring gulls, and pretend you were on an ocean liner heading for distant shores. I did that for a while. Then I went on to the very end where fishermen sat in mute, amiable competition, their boxes and hampers of equipment beside them. Halfway back, I spotted an unoccupied bench and sat down. The sun was warm on my face, and the sun-heated metal pressed into my back. The breeze played with my hair and the hem of my skirt. I closed my eyes and concentrated. If I wished hard enough, something exciting would happen. A vibration along the bench told me someone else had sat down.
Good afternoon. Glorious day, isn't it?
I opened my eyes and looked at the man sitting at the other end of the bench. He was, I suppose, about 40, clean-shaven, and what women's magazine stories called distinguished, which I took to mean not exactly handsome, but well-groomed, self-assured, and probably wealthy. He wore his expensive-looking clothes with a casual air, as if a linen jacket and silk cravat were everyday wear. He had fair hair, though it was largely hidden by a Panama hat, and his eyes were the colour of the sea on a sunny afternoon.
I hope you don't mind my joining you.
I didn't know what to say, so I shook my head.
The healing power of the sun,
He said, gazing out to sea.
Nothing to beat it. Are you on your own?
Yes, I said, and deciding to establish my credentials in case this was the adventure, I added,
I'm an orphan.
A compassionate furrow deepened between his eyebrows.
I'm sorry to hear that.
He said,
Is this your hometown?
No, I said.
I'm looking for work. Ah, I see. What did you have in mind?
Oh, I can turn my hand to anything. I was pleased with this phrase, which my father used as a term of admiration.
That lad can turn his hand to anything.
Then you should have no trouble,
he said.
My name's Edward, by the way. My friends call me Ned, so I hope you will too.
I nodded, unsure what to say.
What's your name?
He asked.
Linda Brown,
I replied, remembering a second later that I was Marianne Fairfax now.
Linda. How appropriate.
I must have appeared puzzled because he said,
Do you speak any Spanish?
I shook my head.
Well, in Spanish, Linda means pretty, so the name suits you.
My blush blended with the warmth of the sun, and I felt an odd fizzing sensation.
Would you care to take a walk, Linda?
I was on my feet immediately, scooping up my cardigan and duffel bag before Ned had started to get up. As we headed towards the turnstiles, I saw that he was limping. He must have noticed that I was looking at his leg because he said,
Souvenir I brought back from the war, I'm afraid.
Images of wartime valour and acts of heroism danced through my mind. As we left the pier, I took my sunglasses out of my bag and put them on. Ned gave me an approving glance.
They're nice. They make you look like Audrey Hepburn.
Heading away from the lively part of the seafront, and at a fairly slow pace to allow for the limp, we walked as far as the mermaid statue and then turned inland. Ned told me he was a composer and made me laugh with stories of eccentric musicians and rehearsals going awry. He said he lived in London, near the British Museum, but that he got his best ideas by the sea. I began to imagine going to London getting a job at the British Museum, in the cafe or the gift shop, and meeting Ned for walks. Or perhaps I would work for him, copying out the untidy first drafts of his compositions. "Linda," he would say, "I don't know how I ever managed without you." At one point he asked me where I was staying. When I answered evasively that I wasn't quite sure yet, he said,
Ah, well, plenty of time to arrange that.
We strolled along a street of small shops, browsing the window displays. I hoped it wasn't too obvious that I was mostly looking at our reflected selves, side by side.
Shall we go in here?
Ned suggested at the doorway of a gift shop. I took off my sunglasses as we entered and returned them to my bag. The shop was full of china and glass ornaments arranged on very clean glass shelves, to which notices were fastened at intervals, reading, "I'm lovely to look at and lovely to hold, but if you drop me, I am sold." I moved my duffel bag from my shoulder and hugged it tightly to my chest so it couldn't cause an accident.
What's caught your eye?
Ned asked when I paused. It was a heart-shaped china dish, a couple of inches across, with a pattern of tiny pink roses on the rim.
Yes, that's very pretty,
he said.
Allow me to make you a present of it.
The shop assistant wrapped the dish in tissue and put it in a lilac paper bag. I wanted to say something that showed the moment's significance, but I couldn't find the right phrase. My "thank you" sounded inadequate to me, but Ned seemed satisfied and said, "My pleasure. I think a cup of tea is in order now, don't you?"
Bum, bum.
Looking for something to add to the sunshine this summer? Well, join the Theatrephonic Patreon, and from just £2 a month you can get ad-free episodes, blooper reels, Q&A sessions, merch and more. Head to patreon.com/Theatrephonic to find out more.
Bum, bum.
The copper kettle curled in gold lettering above the tea shop's bow window. The door set a bell tinkling as we went in. Out of the sunshine, the room supplied its own warmth from the sun-heated customers, hissing urn and toasted tea cakes. Conversation simmered like the surface of the sea, a surface broken occasionally by a loud laugh or a child's excited squeal. The wooden tables and chairs were packed closely together in 4 groups, separated by 2 intersecting passageways for the waitresses to hurry back and forth. One of them seated us at a small table tucked between 2 larger ones by a wall. It had 3 chairs, and I put my cardigan and bag on the seat of the third one in the hope that no one would join us. Ned manoeuvred his chair so it didn't impinge on those at the adjoining table, bringing him very close to me. He didn't smell of imperial leather soap and aging tweed like my father, or pipe tobacco and mint humbugs like Uncle George. His faint scent was more exotic and spicy. "This is cosy," he said as he settled himself. The table had a blue cloth, brown and white sugar cubes in separate glass dishes, salt and pepper pots, and a menu like a tall, thin book. When the tea and cakes Ned ordered arrived, an array of pale blue china, cutlery, napkins, and a shiny metal teapot, hot water jug, and tea strainer was spread over the cloth. I was drawn to the bright yellow icing of a lemon fancy on the cake plate, but took an almond tart instead because I thought it would seem more grown up. Ned chose a meringue, which he dissected elegantly with a cake fork. I could see all his smooth, fair hair now that he had removed his hat. I felt a glow of pride when I noticed a woman in a green blouse at the next table watching him. She was wearing a lot of makeup, like a film star. The conversations at the neighbouring tables were quite loud, so we didn't talk much while we had our tea and cake. I felt we were on an island of quiet companionship in the bustling ocean of the tea shop, like old friends who understand each other without words. Ned's hand slid under the hem of my skirt. rested on my knee for a moment, then glided halfway along my thigh and lay still, dry and relaxed. I stared at the crumbs on my plate. I couldn't hear the voices around me properly now, just a strange roar, as if I were holding a shell against my ear to hear the sea. Ned's hand began to stroke my thigh, back and forth, with a gentle wave-like motion. I picked up my teacup. There wasn't much left in it, so I had to tip the cup a long way to get any liquid past my lips. The tea made no difference to the dryness of my mouth. I put the cup down. It rattled awkwardly in the saucer. Ned's hand stroked a little higher.
Have you had enough?
The waitress's tone was accusing, as if questioning our entitlement to have tea and cake.
Only there are people waiting.
She flicked her head towards a small queue forming at the now open door, and a strand of hair escaped her white cap and swung across her forehead. Linda? Ned was smiling at me. His hand had gone. I dragged my voice over the sandpaper of my throat and mouth. Yes, thank you, I said. I've had enough. The waitress made a few random-looking sweeps of her pencil on a pad, and tore off the flimsy sheet and put it on the table.
Cash desk's over there,
she said, with another flick of her head, this time in the opposite direction, and the loose strand of hair followed the movement.
You sit tight, I'll see to this.
Ned eased himself to his feet without disturbing the chairs alongside us, and moved towards the large till. His limp didn't seem heroic anymore. A man at the next table was telling a joke, and the woman in the green blouse laughed loudly. Her laugh sounded like the angry screech of a seagull and made her thick makeup fold into creases. A trio of squabbling children was being shepherded across the room by a threatening father and a placating mother. They blocked the view of the cash desk. I grabbed my belongings from the spare chair and threaded my way between chairs and bodies until I reached the open door. As I stepped over the threshold, the sugary steam of the tea shop dispersed in the fresh sea air. I turned in the general direction of the pier and began to run as fast as I could, terrified of pursuit even though I knew Ned would not be able to run after me. When I reached the seafront, the pavements were more crowded and I had to weave around people, sometimes looping out into the road. But I kept running, my heart thudding and my breath short, until I tripped on an uneven paving slab and fell over. For a moment, there was a void. No motion, no breath, no sound. Then there was pain and gasping. The indifferent cries of gulls and two teenaged boys with slicked-down hair on the opposite side of the pavement laughing at me.
You're showing your knickers, darling,
one of them called. A plump woman in a purple flowered dress shouted at them and helped me to my feet.
No harm done, dear,
she said.
The council should do something about these pavements. They're a death trap.
She was steadying me against the soft cushions of her body. The tropical blooms on her dress were so close I could hardly focus on them, and they seemed to be the source of her overwhelming perfume.
Thank you,
I said.
You're very kind. I'm all right now. Thank you.
I kept repeating, thank you, as if it were a charm that would keep tears at bay.
Not on your own, are you, dear?
She asked.
No,
I replied.
I'm on my way back to my parents. Oh, take it steady then,
she said.
I'm sure they'll wait for you.
The seafront benches had elaborate metalwork at the sides, involving an improbable mix of leaves and shells. The backs and seats were curved artistically, but they were less comfortable than they appeared. I walked along until I reached one that was empty, apart from some discarded fish and chip wrappings, and sat down. There was a litter bin next to the bench, like a large metal flower pot set in a holder of weather-worn wooden slats. A couple of wasps patrolled above it in a bored fashion. I took stock of the situation. My knee had stopped bleeding, my skirt was dirty, and there was a large scuff on one sandal. As I had fallen onto my duffel bag, I expected to find my precious sunglasses snapped in half, but they had survived. I took out the lilac paper bag. Inside its tissue, the dish was now in 3 pieces and a thimbleful of powdered china. I dropped the paper bag and its contents into the bin. One of the wasps made a desultory swoop after it and quickly returned. It was only interested in sugar. From the first time I was allowed out on my own, my parents had warned me never to take sweets from strangers. I had secretly been quite disappointed that no stranger had ever offered me sweets, permitting me to demonstrate my virtue by refusing. The warnings had been so solemn that I hadn't liked to ask for further explanations. I had wondered whether there were people in the world who disliked children so much they planned to kill them at random by persuading them to eat pear drops or butterscotch laced with deadly poison. Recalling this long-discarded theory, I felt that sweets might include almond tarts and heart-shaped china dishes. My understanding of the poison was still hazy. A fast-moving cloud obscured the sun, tinging the sea with grey and drawing a curtain of shadow along the bench. I shivered and put my cardigan on. Then I got up and went to join the group waiting at the shelter as the bus which would take me home came dawdling along the seafront road. The side gate was open when I got home, and I walked round to the back of the house. My father was in the shed, half the contents of which were spread over the lawn. I knew he would put them all back in again because they might come in useful. He was singing "You Belong to Me" and whistling when he forgot the words. See the marketplace in old Algiers. Send me photographs and souvenirs. Just remember when a dream appears, you belong to me. I lingered in the back porch. It was a buffer state between house and garden, containing Wellingtons, umbrellas, the peg bag, and those things my father couldn't find room for in the shed, but my mother wouldn't allow in the house, like outdated seed catalogues and a watering can that could almost certainly be repaired. The kitchen smelled of coconut cake warm from the oven, hard-boiled eggs, and beetroot in vinegar. From the doorway, I watched my mother rinsing lettuce at the sink. She had her back to me, but she knew I was there. She always did. I went and stood beside her. "Have you had a good day?" she asked. "I fell over," I said. "Grazed my knee." "Oh, that's a shame. Never mind. We'll see to it in a minute." I moved closer to her. My mother's body wasn't soft and yielding like that of the kind woman on the seafront. It was thin and firm and utterly reliable. "I'm glad that you and Dad are alive," I said. My mother turned in that graceful, stooping way she had and kissed the top of my head. She said, "So am I, Mouse."
You have been listening to Sweets from Strangers. Written by Barbara Jennings. Performed by Emmeline Braefield. Produced by Cat on a Piano Productions. For a full list of the music in this production, please see the show notes. The Theatrephonic theme tune was composed by Jackson Pentland. Performed by Jackson Pentland, Mollie Fyfe-Taylor, and Emmeline Braefield. For more information about the Theatrephonic podcast, go to catonapiano.uk/Theatrephonic. Tweet or Instagram us at Theatrephonic, or visit our Facebook page. If you enjoy Theatrephonic and would like to get more content, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/Theatrephonic. Please don't forget to rate and review. Thank you for listening.